Welcome back to the second session of today's symposium, Beyond Certainty, What Does Discovery Mean in an Open and Artificially Intelligent World? My name's Danny Kingsley. I'm the Director of Library Services for Information at Deakin University Library. We're now moving into our first panel, which is considering this question from the perspective of influence. Libraries traditionally help people find, manage, and understand information. And as AI increasingly becomes part of almost all aspects of our digital lives, it becomes important to consider not just discovery of information, but also the mechanisms and influences that sit behind that information. We're going to start this session with two videos from our overseas presenters. The first one's from AJ Boston, who is the Scholarly Communication Librarian from Murray State University.
Hello, Beyond Certainty Symposium. I'm AJ Boston. I'm a Scholarly Communication Librarian at Murray State University. Thank you very much to Danny and Craig for inviting me to come talk to you. So I decided to challenge myself and present this walking on campus holding a selfie stick, and this is deeply embarrassing. I'll start off by saying that I am not an expert in artificial intelligence. I think as we read articles online, have conversations on campus, and just follow the general discord, what I tend to find are two kind of extremes. We have the AI evangelist, and they are, a lot of them, severely over leveraged, and they need to make the money back. And so you see a lot of overhyped claims. And then on the other hand is AI atheism, where you will hear people say, don't use AI at all. I think this is also unhelpful in terms of the discourse and our individual understanding of the benefits and dangers of this new technology. So yeah, this is much more deeply uncomfortable to walk around with a selfie stick than I had imagined. All right, I had to come back to my office. So over the past couple of months, I have been collecting some stories that have just come across my feed about AI. So under bad news, OpenAI has admitted that AI hallucinations are mathematically inevitable, not just engineering flaws. So that's, like the biggest AI company saying, no matter what you do, there's gonna be hallucinations that happen. At the Harvard Business Review said that AI generated work slop is destroying productivity. We hear a lot about gains that will be made in workplace efficiency through AI, but in a lot of places we are using AI and AI is not doing a great job, and we're spending that much more time going through and kind of correcting for those mistakes. On the good news side of things, Peter Hall at MIT Technology News reported that Google's DeepMind, their new AI, can help historians understand ancient Latin inscriptions. And Chloe Veltman at NPR reported that Boston Public Library has been increasing access to a vast historic archive using AI. So there's some fundamentally big flaws with AI, but then there's also kind of more modest cases which seem to be beneficial. Pew Research in September did a study of Americans and their views on AI. These better demonstrate kind of the good cases and the bad cases for AI. So for instance, 74% of Americans think that AI could play a role in forecasting the weather, searching for financial crimes or fraud in government benefit claims, and developing new medicines. And then at the very low end of the scale, around 11%, Americans think that AI should have a role in advising people about their faith in God, judging whether two people could fall in love, or making decisions about how to govern the country. On the one hand, it may be very good for big mathematical computations that are checked by specialists, but Americans are much more deeply skeptical, and I imagine this is true across the globe, about AI being involved in people's individual personal decisions. Pew did a really good job of rounding up a good subset of different applications for AI. I like to compare that with the 4 random articles that kind of came across my feed that I happened to collect, because I think that is kind of more indicative of what AI seems like to people who are not studying this every day. When I try to think about AI through different lenses, a lot of times I'll compare it to cars. I'm in the US, we're a very car-heavy country, and I love to drive. I love the freedom it gives me. But on the other hand, if you look back through history, it has led to, climate change, lots of deaths. There's a lot of things that have happened because we have cars that are like really bad. And so I don't discount at all the negative impacts that AI is having. I also don't think that is necessarily reason to not explore any applications for AI. What that tells me is that we need to be more engaged with what's happening so that we can help maybe affect policy. In August, there was a Forbes report that Helsinki had gone an entire year without a single traffic death. What they cite for that were lower speed limits, smarter street design, upgraded infrastructure for pedestrians and cyclists, and better enforcement. So at least in the case of vehicles, it only took us 100 years, but there are common sense policies that we can enact that make cars much more safe to have on the roads. David Lanks, he's quoted in a Library Journal piece saying, "Right now, the place where librarians and libraries could have the most impact isn't on trying to change OpenAI or Microsoft or Google. It's really in looking at implementation policy." One example I've seen is Patrick Lynn on his Substack. He wrote, "Why we're not using AI in this course, despite its obvious benefits." He talks about all the ways that AI can be used for learning and education, but his point is we're not going to use it in this classroom for these very specific reasons. So that very specific way that you are looking at implementation in a very narrow way. Todd Carpenter in the Scholarly Kitchen wrote, "We could use a model licensing framework for scholarly content use in AI tools." Carpenter is giving examples of standardized licenses that we could implement to make sure that we are getting a fair trade when we use or allow our content to be used by AI. I think in summary, to go back to an earlier point I made, is that we don't want to be AI evangelist, and we also don't want to be AI atheist. We want to hold a healthy skepticism. We need to take stock of the benefits as well as the downsides, and not just do a simple mathematical equation of does one outweigh the other. We need to ask ourselves, are the benefits good enough that we could think of policy implementation that could account for those dangers or downsides? Even if we can think of policy, what are our odds of actually being able to implement that policy? I think if there's anything I hope to accomplish today is to give voice to some of you that have been hesitant to have a strong opinion on AI. I have wanted to avoid the topic a little bit, but you can't avoid it. No matter what field you work in, it has implications for you. We don't all need to become experts on AI in every subject. We do need to know how AI affects our specific field, and I think that's actually a really good thing, just to focus on how AI affects your field. Those very specific applications are how we need to think about application and policy. So thank you very much, Beyond Certainty Symposium. It looks like you will have a great lineup. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and enjoy the rest of the program.
Well, there you go. Thank you, AJ. And got a bonus view of Murray State University as part of that as well. We're going to move on to the second video now. It's called Passenger or Pilot. It's from Caroline Ball, who until very recently was the Academic Librarian for Business Law and Social Sciences at the University of Derby. She's about to take up the role of Community Engagement Lead at the Open Book Collective. So we'll watch her video now.
Hello, everyone. My name is Caroline Ball, and I'm an academic librarian from the University of Derby in the UK. The title of my talk today is Passenger or Pilot? Reclaiming Agency in the New World of AI. It's a deliberately provocative title because I want us to think about how we, so libraries, librarians, universities, are positioning ourselves in relation to AI. Are we shaping the direction, or are we just being carried along? So are we pilots or are we passengers? How many times this week or this last month have you heard someone say something like, AI is inevitable, or we can't get left behind, or it'll happen with or without us? I don't know about you, but I hear these phrases constantly, from vendor presentations, university strategy documents, even just in the media, and especially in conversations with staff and students and colleagues. And every time I kind of flinch a little bit, because this kind of language makes it sound like we don't have any agency. It places us in the role of passive observers, just sitting in the back of the plane while someone else, usually a tech vendor, is charting the course. And now, Microsoft has branded their tool Copilot. But if you think about it, who's actually at the controls? And more importantly, why are libraries being asked to sit quietly in the passenger seat when the decisions being made affect the future of knowledge itself? This idea of inevitability, what we might call AI determinism, is incredibly powerful and incredibly disempowering at the same time. We all know that language matters. When people say things like inevitable, disruption, or we can't afford to get left behind, it shapes how institutions behave. And the result is often a scramble to adopt the newest AI tool without really stopping to ask the deeper questions like, is this tool fit for our purposes? Whose interests does it serve? What are the risks as well as the benefits? When inevitability is the kind of key narrative, it doesn't leave any space for resistance, for critical reflection, or even for being able to set our own priorities. It locks us into that reactive headspace, always chasing after the next shiny thing, rather than leading with our own values. And while we're distracted with keeping up, the real power shifts. When systems operate as black boxes, when we can't see how an algorithm is ranking results or what data it's trained on, the power doesn't just vanish, it concentrates in the hands of those who own the systems, the vendors. And that means that libraries, universities, and by extension our users, are left in a position of dependency. We have to take the vendor's word for it because we literally can't look inside. And inside those black boxes, existing inequalities are often amplified. Think about English language bias in discovery systems, or metadata standards that reflect Western perspectives on what counts as authoritative knowledge. These systems quietly reinforce hierarchies of culture, race, and language, and the more we rely on them without transparency, the harder it is to notice or challenge that bias. And so the stakes here are really high. This isn't just about convenience. It's about who gets to decide what knowledge is visible and what remains hidden. But I don't want this to feel hopeless, because we do have leverage. The good news is that pressure works. When libraries, governments, and communities demand transparency, companies do respond. Let's look at the policy landscape, for example. California's AI Transparency Act is going to take effect in 2026, and that legally mandates certain disclosures. In Australia, your government has already published model clauses for AI procurement. So that shows that regulation is possible. And on the corporate side, even Microsoft now produces responsible AI transparency reports, which they started last year. Are they perfect? No, not even close. But the fact that they exist at all proves that sustained pressure has an effect. And within our own profession, groups like the Association of Research Libraries in the US are developing guiding principles for AI use. So all of that collective effort is what begins to shift norms. So when we speak up, when we organise, we really can make change happen. I also want to highlight something that I don't think we talk about enough, and that's the cultural assumptions that are embedded in discovery itself. So discovery systems are not neutral. They privilege English language results, they rely on metadata structures that come out of Western traditions of classification, and they determine, often invisibly, whose knowledge counts. But there are alternatives, and they're really inspiring. So Indigenous communities have been creating systems like the Brian Deere classification system, the traditional knowledge labels, and platforms like Makutu CMS. And these approaches are participatory. They allow communities to define how their knowledge is described and accessed and contextualized. So for me, these examples are a reminder that discovery doesn't have to look the way it currently does. We can choose to design systems that serve diverse epistemologies and that don't just default to Western categories. So what would it mean for libraries to reclaim agency in all of this? I think it looks something a little like this. So transparent systems where users can actually understand how results are ranked and ordered and prioritized. Community responsive discovery, which is designed around diverse needs rather than just assumptions about the majority. Ethical partnerships with vendors, so relationships that are grounded in shared values and not just technical functionality or convenience or price. And collective strength, libraries acting together across consortia and professional networks to amplify our voice. That's a vision of libraries not as passengers, not even as co-pilots, but institutions that are steering with intention. And this isn't pie in the sky stuff. There are practical steps that all of us can take. At an individual level, say this week or next week, you can do a quick audit of the AI tools that are already in use in your library. You might actually be surprised, or maybe horrified, how many are already embedded in discovery systems or vendor platforms or databases. And then once you've found them, ask your vendor what documentation exists on the algorithm, what testing has been done on bias. Even just raising the question starts that conversation. At the institutional level, over the next year, you could start to build AI clauses into procurement guidelines. You could require transparency reports as part of contract renewals. You could partner with different user groups within your institutions, so students, researchers, community members, to make sure that their voices go into shaping discovery. And at the wider sector level, it's all about coordination. Consortia can push for shared standards, professional bodies can set expectations, and collectively we can invest in open source and community controlled alternatives. This is how we move from being passengers to pilots, by acting at all three levels. And the really crucial thing is, we already have what we need. We've got policy frameworks, we've got professional principles, we've got legal precedents, we've even got corporate proof of concept in those transparency reports. So the question isn't, can we demand transparency? The question is, are we going to? So let's look at reframing the narrative. We're not passengers on the AI journey, sitting passively back and being taken wherever they want us to go. And we're not even just co-pilots. We are the ones who decide where that plane is going. If we want a discovery landscape that's transparent, ethical, equitable, and responsive to our communities, then we have to steer towards it. And I think we can. Thank you very much for listening.
Great.
Thank you, Caroline. I have to say, it's slightly worrying. It looked like that the aircraft that was in that image was actually going into battle, and I hope that's not where we're going. Let's bring the discussion now into real time. Our panel consists of 3 people from Deakin University, bringing a range of perspectives, from curating information to developing new tools and engaging with them in different ways. We've got Dr. Luke Heemsbergen, Senior Lecturer at the School of Communication and Creative Arts with an interest in emerging technologies, Allan Jones, the General Manager of Software Engineering at the A2I2 Institute, who works on design and implementation of industry applications. And online we've got Danny Johnson, Director of Library Services, Outreach and Scholarly Services, who's been leading the library's work on AI for the university. So we're going to wrap the discussion around 4 broad themes. And the first one is going to be creation and consumption of knowledge. We've got shared documents that have the themes listed as headings, and we'll put the links to those documents into the chat. Remember, if you want to share information or observation via social media, use the hashtag AIBeyond2025. And please add your thoughts and comments to this document as we progress. The Q&A function in the Zoom webinar is there for you to ask questions directly of the panel, and all of these contributions will be used for our final report as an outcome of this event. So let's get started. Luke, I'm going to start with you. So starting with the creation and consumption of knowledge, maybe you could talk about how you're seeing AI changing research practice.
Sure, thanks very much. I think that we've hit a space where the colloquial phrase of "do your own research" has shifted, and actually now can mean something else, in the sense that more people are doing more what they consider research with more rigorous tools. The problem with that is when I sit down, that I've encountered, is when I sit down and I ask something like ChatGPT or another AI service to do its best rigorous research, it sounds great and it doesn't get it right all of the time, or it gets it wrong in a way that is really constrictive to what we want to actually use that knowledge for. And there's lots of examples you can go into, but I think what it brings to the fore is when we think about the creation and consumption of knowledge, there is a democratization of knowledge that is the creation and consumption of knowledge that is happening through these tools. I see it as similar to the democratization of cultural creation and consumption that we saw through Web 2.0. But with that democratization comes the paradox, right? Comes concerns of quality for what we're using the knowledge for, and also the larger I'll start with some of the economic concerns around why and how this knowledge is being created. I was going to say ecology, and we can talk about that as well in terms of the ecological impact, but in terms of the economies of creating knowledge through AI tools, we have come to learn and know what user-generated content through social media looks like, feels like, what it does to our society, and how it influences us to react as economic agents and social agents. We're going to find that out with knowledge generated through widely distributed AI tools as well. So I think that's really where our concern has to be focused, and the monitoring and the evaluation has to be sitting.
Interesting. So Danny, considering our information users, how do you see AI and open access shifting their ability to engage with information?
Thanks, Danny. I'm going to go out on a bit of a limb here. I hope I'm not going to say anything too controversial, but scholarly publishing, scholarly material is exclusionary, right? For lots of different reasons. It excludes by design, written by academics, largely for an academic audience, lots of barriers to access that we know exist. I think that combined AI, including but not limited to generative AI, so AI more broadly, when combined with open access, can offer enormous potential to reduce barriers to scholarly material. It can make it more discoverable, more digestible, more accessible, not just for different cohorts within academic institutions, but outside academic institutions, broader society, primary school students, secondary school students, people who will never necessarily explicitly engage with an academic higher education institution or with scholarly content in its raw form or pure form, I guess. I think it's not just about simplifying content through Gen AI summaries. I think that's one use case. It's one way we think about people's engagement, opening up access to engage with scholarly content. But I think what it's really about is how we can connect people to valid, credible data and sources that previously would have been out of reach, either because of those discoverability issues, because of those commercial barriers, or because the very nature of scholarly publishing language and formats can be intractable to the majority of the population. So that opportunity to open up to communities and to individuals, I think, is a really significant shift. I absolutely agree. There are so many risks associated with that at the individual level, at the tool and the technology level, at the society, sort of the social level, in terms of misinterpretation and satisficing behaviour, misinformation or disinformation, oversimplification, biases, all these things. We have to acknowledge those, and we need to, at the same time, recognise the power of that shift. I think also we need to be thinking about how, from my perspective, as libraries and as academic institutions, how we might influence that for the better, while not building or retaining existing barriers to access. So thinking about open practice, what makes scholarly content, through making scholarly content openly available, and thinking about how we can use AI to then make that more discoverable, as well as more flexible in terms of the contextualization of that content and being more audience driven for particular cohorts that we want to have engaged with this content.
Great, thank you. Allan, how might collaboration and research be affected by introduction of new tools?
Yeah, so I think to sort of consider this in the context of what was just said by Luke and Danny, you got to look at what the current sort of pervasive media narratives are around AI, which tend to be largely around hyper-industrialization or big increase in productivity, or sort of democratizing creativity. So, people can do more creatively than they could with less effort. And I think these are harmful narratives to focus on in isolation, because what they do is neglect the power of AI to be sort of a cognitive glue of sorts across different sets of people, and different people with different backgrounds and understanding of things. So adding that translation mechanism and building tools that allow for coordination amongst people is a really powerful opportunity for the deployment of AI, especially in a context like academia, and to what Danny just said too, facilitating that sort of value realization outside of the academic boundaries, and allowing people to sort of engage in research either as consumers or even as participants in a sort of richer and more embodied way, I think is a really big opportunity. I think a big question to ask is like, what game have we been playing in academia? What are the sort of constraints and influencing factors that are changing the dynamics of that game now? And what game do we want to try and play in academic institutions? And what does that require from the sort of standpoint of being bold and perhaps diverting focus from the metrics that perpetuate the sort of cycle of the rat race in research, and what can you do in your local context that is sort of a powerful signal for that game you want to play.
Great, thank you. Okay, so that's got us started, audience. It's time for you to chime in. So remember that we would ask you to add any questions you have for the panel to the Q&A section, and feel free to make comments in the shared document. We are also moving into our first Menti question. So the Menti QR code is going to come up on the screen, and also there's the number. So if you don't want to use the QR code, just go to www.menti.com and put in the number that's on the screen. And the first question we'll be asking you to answer is, where would you put yourself on a sliding scale in terms of how much you create knowledge using AI and how much you consume it? We'll leave that open for now, and perhaps if we can put the Menti code into the chat as well, so that people who miss the QR code can still participate, and we'll continue on and we'll look at the mentioned results in a few moments. Moving on to the question of misinformation, our second sort of theme of today in this panel. So Danny, libraries have traditionally helped people navigate information, but this is now supercharged with information all around us. So what does that mean for us in practice?
Yeah, misinformation. I mean, it's one of the most pressing challenges of our time. And I think it's important to remember that it does predate generative AI. Social media alone has reshaped how we create information, how we share it, how we distort it. But while misinformation isn't new, how quickly it spreads, how convincing it looks has changed. And AI is, absolutely an accelerator of that. I think one of the things we need to think about is how AI can also give us the power to evaluate and push back. And I think it is an important thing to think about. How do we combat misinformation with the same tools that promulgate it? I don't know, but I think we need to be thinking about that. I do believe that libraries have never been more important, and there's lots of places where we have influence in terms of governance and policy and procurement and licensing and systems and search and discovery layers and things like that. But I think from an information literacy perspective, that's the area that I sort of want to focus on. And I think our role as teachers and guides in information literacy is absolutely supercharged in this environment. It does sometimes feel like a bit of a losing battle at times, but I think it is a real moment of opportunity. And as libraries, and that's the perspective I'm coming from, we really sort of need to embrace that role as information professionals and think about how we're cultivating those deep and critical engagement with information. There's a bit of conjecture around AI, what is information literacy? What is digital literacy? What is AI literacy? I don't see AI literacy as something separate from information literacy. It's a part of that conversation. And if we think about information literacy as sort of empowering people with the critical skills to find and evaluate and use and create information critically and ethically and responsibly, that is never more important than it is now. And that's not just to be a good student or to be a good academic, but it's actually important in order to live and learn and work in a digital world. So that capability, information literacy, is so fundamental to a thriving human existence these days. So, I guess I see our role in the library space as helping people to navigate what is now an incredibly complex information landscape, and to be able to do that with confidence and discernment for the world that we live in, not just for academic purposes, which is often where we end up focusing in our institutions.
Fantastic. Well, speaking of academic purposes, Luke, and we're talking about misinformation, can you address the issue of oversaturation or academic slop resulting from AI deployment across the publishing lifestyle? Your turn.
Oh, academic slop. I wanted to speak just to follow up on that, if I can, Danny, in the sense that I think choices around what we value and what becomes the knowledge we want to see, whether it is through the organizational industry relationships we engender through our libraries, et cetera, really does matter. And I mean, this even brings us back to Karen Ball's talk, where she talked about the different ways we can value knowledge and where it comes from and what it means, and how to get away from that. How to get away from that kind of dispersion of data that says, there's going to be one person that has all of the citations and that's it. And that she had a few really lovely models on there. The one that also came to mind to me, and I'm sorry that all of you will know about this more than I do, but it's that like the Cuban algorithm for library curation, where you try to actually engender the surfacing of voices you otherwise wouldn't for distribution of knowledge. In the AI space, you see that, and I'm getting to academic slop, you see that failing right now. There's the companies are trying to do that. The most grotesque probably example is Google, right, making Black Nazis, the rest of this, to trying to steer our algorithms that is generative in a certain way. When that comes to mapping knowledge, I don't know what that looks like yet, and I don't know how that gets us away from the academic slop, but it's definitely, I think, there, using those tools you were speaking to, right? That's where the interface is, of trying to get past slop to signal, but very importantly, deciding what type of signal we want. right? And that's kind of the first step there. Towards misinformation, there's a lot of work on critical misinformation studies that says, look, it's not just something's factually inaccurate, it's that you're setting up power structures in a way that don't let other stories come into being, come into the discourse. And I've done some work there in the Australian sense with elections, but I think it absolutely applies to what we're talking about here in terms of, okay, if there is, a misinformed public or a misinformed research base because of a certain type of shaping for structural systems, right? Elsevier likes us to look somewhere. Why? Right? Because they like Elsevier, not because they want to solve cancer. Like that, these are the reasons. So how do we deal with that? What kind of agency do we have to push to understand that as a type of misinformation so that we can then structurally say, look, this is what's being suppressed, this is what's being elevated. Do we agree with this and why? What types of things do we want to know about from whom, as opposed to taking for granted that what Copilot does or et cetera, is the way to go.
Great. And actually, we're going to be talking a little bit about some of those issues in the second panel. So we might swing back to it in the end to bring it together in our last session of the day. Allan, so we hear people, and Luke mentioned it earlier, about people saying, do your own research. So what influence do academics have on that, what they do there?
Yeah. So considering this, I sort of look at it through the lens of sense making, both individual and collectively. And I think there was a powerful shift during COVID in terms of the broad trust in academic institutions and in like authorities communicating truthfully and in good faith. So if you look at it through that lens, you say to yourself, like, what did the global population have accessible to them as sense-making apparatuses? And you look at that both in terms of accessibility of information and knowledge, if you want to call it that, amongst the misinformation sphere, as well as like what actually resonated with them in their experience. And I think with that shift that happened during COVID, we had an abundance of research happening in that space because it was a huge like collective response to a global problem. But the broader population didn't really get to participate in that in ways that made sense to them. So I think as like academic institutions, we need to look at what our sort of role and accountability is in how like knowledge can be disseminated and exchanged as well. Because I think it's important to sort of have that feedback loop so that we understand how what's being produced resonates and is relevant to the population and is context and place aware, and look to both be sort of guardians on how to have literacy in doing research, but also building the protocols in what that actually looks like for a well-informed and empowered community behind research.
Okay, great. So audience, it's time for you to chime in again, this time on the question of misinformation. So we'll put the Menti up again for those who need to log in. It's the same Menti, it'll just get moved forward. So also remember, add any questions you've got to the Q&A section. The question we're putting now into the Menti is, in your experience with engaging with AI for the purposes of finding something out, how would you estimate the quality of the results? So that's the question that we've got up in the Menti at the moment. I don't know if we're going to put up the Menti QR code, but we'll continue on. The next theme is opportunities and concerns. So, Danny, what opportunities do you think the new AI environment provides libraries to be influential, to have influence?
I am biased in my response here, but I honestly believe that libraries are uniquely positioned to lead in an AI-enabled world. We support people within our institutions, beyond our institutions, to build those skills, capabilities, expertise that they need to be able to live, learn, and work in this type of environment. I guess to give a bit of an example of that in practice, at Deakin, I would absolutely say our library is leading the charge within the institution. So the library led the co-design of Deakin's Gen AI framework and principles, which is the cross-institutional set of principles that guides engagement with generative AI for our Deakin community, students and staff alike. We've also, as a library, guided the shape of our 2025 institutional Gen AI action plan, and we've been embedded into working groups related as a result of that relate to ethical considerations in terms of strategic procurement of AI technologies, tools assessment, researcher, AI education, quite a number of different working groups there. We've recently developed a Gen AI hub, which is in progress, but you're welcome to go and search. You'll find it if you search Deakin Gen AI Hub, which has resources and programming that is sort of designed to support our students and staff, whether they're academics or professional staff or students or community members, and it's really all about building foundational literacies and creating spaces for reflection and principled engagement with information. We're also chairing the newly formed Gen AI Enablement Advisory Group for our university. And from an internal, looking inward to the library, we earlier this year, we established our Library AI Lab, which is really designed to think about AI in library practice and to support our library and our library people to build the capability and capacity that they need, but also to provide some coordination to AI-related activity that we're involved in and kind of consider and support change and opportunity and the challenges in library practice specifically. So I kind of see that Deakin experience as a really powerful example of where libraries can best influence and provide value to our institutions through the expertise that we've actually always had. We're not doing anything, like it's pushing our boundaries, right? But these sort of the subject matter expertise we're coming from is stuff that's always been here. We've always had it as libraries. And I think they're examples not just of leading the charge in terms of, AI literacies, but actually in terms of how libraries can be active participants in institutional AI governance and strategic planning. I would say I think that's possible because academic libraries, and I can't speak for all academic libraries, this is my experience of what I've seen, but academic libraries do sit at that nexus of education and research and the business operations of an institution. And it's a really unique position that we hold, and it gives us an opportunity to lead and advise and connect and collaborate and enable those critical and creative and ethical kind of considerations to be surfaced, those principle-based considerations to surface when we're talking about AI use in our institutions. And I think that is a really powerful place for libraries to be positioned. There's all sorts of other challenges that we experience. Don't get me wrong, it's not all rose-colored glasses, but I think that, libraries have never been more important for our institutions.
Thanks, Danny. And this symposium is actually genuinely brought to you by Deakin University Library, and that was a very good message from our sponsor. Okay, moving on, Allan, to a question about you. When we discussed this before, we got together, we talked, and you talked about the shift from an attention economy to a relationship economy. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose like an anchoring point of perspective to start with is if you ask a lot of people within sort of Western society what the most valuable currency is, they're likely to say it's time. Whereas if you go to sort of more Eastern philosophical principles, it becomes apparent that it's awareness and attention. And I think we're definitely in an age where our attention has been hijacked. We know that there's pervasive social narratives now that are detailing the harm and effect of that. I think it's created a schism between a digital world and a physical world. And I think coming back to the previous point I made is if you're in the digital space and things make sense to you and resonate to your experience, then you're likely to be in a feedback loop where you're participating in that. Whereas if you've gone through COVID, for instance, then you're probably still dealing with some of the isolating effects and understanding where your people and your communities are in the physical world. So I think in shifting the dynamics there, part of it is looking at what our relationship is with our data, because I think data and sort of the digitization of it came along in a way that nobody was prepared for, and that broadly we didn't have literacy for, but we understand the effects of relinquishing that consent that was never really asked for in the digital realm around data. So I think it's about how do we reframe our data custodianship and our sovereignty of data, especially for the communities that are traditionally governed by that kind of sovereignty, and have like intentional exchanges and protocols built around that. How can we benefit from looking at those models and understanding how that connects to relationality? And how can we, within the digital world, bring a greater sense of relationality and opportunity for participating in the physical world more?
Fantastic. Okay, audience, time for you to do some work again. Our third question in the Menti is to please describe an opportunity that you see with AI and a concern you have with AI. So that's the third question in the Menti today. So last sort of set of formal questions is around trust, picking up what our keynote speaker was talking about partly, and also picking up AJ's comments about AI evangelists and AI atheists. Luke, you mentioned in our pre-talk about backlashes. Can you expand on that?
Sure. So the most recent paper I saw in The Guardian news report was that there was 7,000 students who had signed a petition saying they didn't want a university to run a certain unit that, quote unquote, required students to use generative AI to make art. And it was for ethical concerns, it was for ecological concerns, but 7,000 students engaging in a subject that they don't want to have happen is quite exceptional, right? So there is a backlash among artists, there's a backlash among industries around thinking about, again, the economic and ecological questions that these new tools foment. And when you look at that backlash, there is, I think, some response of it's new and it's not understood, and therefore I'm not sure what to think of it. But that's not the whole story, right? There is the economic structures and the ecological structures that I think we've spoken to a little bit. And as Jathan Sadowski has pointed out, he has a book called The Mechanic and the Luddite, or The Luddite and the Mechanic, I forget which, sorry, Jathan. But one of the points in there is that it seems right now there's no way to say no to these sets of technologies. And his point is that in any other context, we'd have words to describe that specific lack of consent, right? But in this context, with this technology, we don't. We just are told that we're being left behind, that it's revolutionary, that et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's a big piece of the backlash. You are an artist and you are happy to share your art online, but there's no way for you not to have that art used, right? And that's really something to be considered. Yeah, so I think that's some of the backlash that I'd.
Yeah, that's interesting because that speaks to that sort of perceived lack of agency that Caroline was mentioning in her talk as well. Danny, in the kind of exposure that you've had and the conversations you've had, what about our users' trust in the outputs of AI? What have you sort of come across so far?
I think trust in AI outputs, it's a really complex kind of conversation, isn't it? I will hark back to what I was saying before about information literacy and by extension AI literacy. And I think that if we are equipping people, our users, our in our case, students and staff, to engage critically and not blindly with AI outputs, we're on the right track, we're doing the right thing, right? I will, though, also contradict myself because I think what we are observing is a change in information behaviour. So I think traditionally when we think about information behaviours and we have these information sort of models, we talk a lot about sense making and this idea that sort of information is understood by the discoverer based on the specific tasks they're trying to do and who they are, what they know, what their expertise is. And that we know that individuals will sort of shuffle between certainty and uncertainty, or trust and mistrust maybe, as they engage in an information seeking task. So I think in that context, the information literacy work we do, is really powerful, and is foundational, learning that we all need from, kindergarten through to whatever level of education we go to. But it doesn't actually, it has more limited kind of impact in terms of the information behaviour that we're increasingly seeing over recent years, which is that passive kind of engagement. So that passive consumption of information that happens, increasingly, that really challenges, critical digital literacies and the efficacy of that kind of skill building and training, because we're passively consuming information without an intentional focus on specifically finding an answer or learning a thing or doing a task. So it's kind of that, ingestion of information, trusting, blind trust or low care factor. So we're absorbing this information without engaging critically with it. And I think that's a real challenge, right? I'm not sure how we deal with that side of things through education. I think there's more limited opportunity to do that through our education programs. We are talking about systematic change.
Danny, can I ask one question next? I
Yeah.
think that's a really interesting point, and it to me, like maybe a silver lining or a way to do that is it brings back the attention economy versus relationship economy, because this passive doom scrolling or whatever, right? Whether it's academic articles or the news, is based on attention economy thinking, right? And maybe if there's more of a relational aspect, right, of how you're interacting with information, maybe we get back to those critical skills where you're not actually taking it passively, in the same way that when you have a relationship with a human, right? I'm not saying the eyes, but when you have a relationship with a human, you don't take everything they say for granted. You don't, right? There's a give and take there that I think is lost in the attention economy, or at least we've seen that it's been lost in the attention economy. So maybe in a relational economy, with agents of information or otherwise, we can start to have those conversations again.
Yeah, that's true.
Interesting observation. Do you have observations on that?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting to consider the personal responsibility that people feel and exercise in their information behaviors, and what this shift in kind of capability, which AI I think offers novelty and utility, and figuring out which of the two, which of the two is best represented in an output you're getting is really important. But also understanding the causal effects of, taking what an AI gives you as acceptable for your conditions, right? It's like if you get an output from an AI that looks efficient, you hand it on, and then it's somebody else's slop to clean up. Do you understand that as somebody who's participating in that system and in that sort of relational dynamic? So I think as we sort of progress through this age of super capable AI, we'll start to get an understanding of some of those causal effects, how small and incidental they can start off as, and hopefully kind of build a bit more of a fabric of care and accountability around that.
Great.
Really like that, Allan. I was just going to add to that and say that I think that is something that I do reflect on quite a bit, and I don't want to discount the incredible power that companies and have in this, in terms of shaping individual behaviour. But I do think quite a lot about what our responsibilities are as either a consumer or a creator or both, and reflecting on that. And I think that intentionality around how we engage is something that we can, at an individual level at least, try to exert some control over and have some reflection on as individuals, despite the fact that, sometimes we're working against the machine as well.
Okay, audience, we've got one more Menti question for you for this session, which is the fourth question, and to create a word cloud. So we're asking people to write up to 3 separate words that describe your thoughts on the issue of trust in AI. So we'll forward the Menti now and jump in as you as we have this next discussion. So we're just finishing up this part of the conversation to just reflect a bit on the presentations. So thinking about AJ's presentation, and not least the sort of post-production work he did on it, which was quite fun. But he was sort of making comments about the hallucinations being mathematically inevitable, that there is actually sort of an inherent problem in the kind of coding. And I thought that was something that was quite interesting. And another thing I thought was probably worth reflecting on was his sort of range of what people felt through whatever the survey he was referring to was good or bad, in terms of the kinds of things AI work appears to, or people think AI is good for or not good for. They were things that came out for me. What were sort of themes that came out for you, or observations? I don't know, do you want to start?
I'll pick up off the end of that. OpenAI had its Dev Day, I believe, yesterday or maybe 2 days ago, for being in Australia or in the future. And subsequently, or this parallel to that, they put out this paper that said, which economic activities, i.e. jobs, do our models now perform on a 50-50 basis? The expert would choose the model or a human intervention. And it was it was really interesting to see which it was basically a non-synthetic benchmark, right? To try to determine, what can AI actually do in the economy. And the level of trust around the types of activities that you trust AI with or not, experts in their own field would trust AI with or not, was really fascinating. Maybe I'll just leave it there to say, go do your own research. No, look it up, because this paper was quite incredible in how it stratified types of economic activity, i.e. jobs, right? And then the capacities that different models had to fulfill those jobs as graded by humans, more or less. So yeah, I'll leave that out there, not as a advertisement for ChatGPT 5, but as something to think critically about in terms of how they're measuring this, and then think about when that trust about being good enough, having an employer, a model that's good enough to do the work exists.
We are, I'm noting down, and there's a team here who are behind the scenes, and thank you to that team. We're noting down these sorts of references that are happening and links. So when we do the write-up, we will include those sorts of references and links in the write-up. So that doesn't mean don't go off and do your own research, but we can also partly do it for you, as in I will ask Luke for the link. Danny, do you have any observations on AJ's sort of talk?
I agree with his observation that both evangelicism and atheism are both, deeply unhelpful. I would observe that the media feeds that binary discourse. I think, it is a very black and white kind of discourse that we have, and it is all grey, right? It is so grey. In every risk there is opportunity, and in every opportunity there are probably 10 risks, right? So, I think the conversation and the discourse needs to be much more complex than it sometimes, is presented to us as. I do also think, though, that in that discourse and in some of the articles and things, a lot of the articles that I see, it's always technology led, and that I feel like we're missing this human agency discussion in that discourse. What is the human decision making in there? So what? There's hallucinations. What is the human decision in that context, in terms of as a consumer or as a creator, as a developer of that product, and how I'm going to make it better? I think there's some interesting space in there that's not explored enough in terms of our role as humans in consuming, but also in creating that content. So that's my observation on AJ's.
Interesting. What about you, Allan?
Yeah. I suppose riffing off what Danny just said, I think there's a dearth in the humanities and social sciences discourse focusing on what we can do functionally with AI is where it's at, and with the various problems and sort of crisis situations that surround us being considered is a lot of that's really well covered, and I think is really important for people to consume and understand. But I think there's some really powerful paths forward for us to actually sort of organize around the circumstances and context we're in, and make good effect of it with good intention. I think it's also interesting to consider how we position, or how we've sort of positioned and viewed AI as a like arbiter of truth and as a benchmark for like bias and ethical conduct. And I think like increasingly we're looking at the sort of interface and outputs of that to hold a very high benchmark. But then out in society, what do we expect from people in that sense, especially people interacting with AI? So I think that's interesting to consider. This sort of like whether you consider conscious or intelligent in a sense. We have these agents that are representing high levels of intellectual output and doing so with a certain set of values and biases in how they represent their output. So how does that fit into the society we have, and how do we work with that productively and effectively for the communities we want to serve?
Okay, well, that then takes us into that question of agency, which is what Caroline was picking up in her video. Observations about that that question of we speak as though we don't have agency when we do. Luke, you're thoughtful there?
I don't know yet. There's a popular way of thinking around science and technology studies that says when technologies are still malleable, they haven't been socialized in a very specific way, that they're, sorry, this is the truth, they're still malleable, right? They haven't been socialized into specific ways we use them, so you can push them in the directions you want. Cell phones are now cell phones, social media are now social media. There's not much we can do about that. And the thought here, as well as technologies emerge, there's more room, they're more malleable. I don't know the capacity to which we have to test that out, thinking about the infrastructure side of AI that goes into model training. And so like, prove me wrong, right? But Allan being the infrastructure side of AI and the scale with which the deployments happen. That malleability definitely exists on the social side. Again, sorry, OpenAI put out a deepfake generator for your friends and family, right? That's a heap of fun, and you get to mess with just your friends and family. And thankfully, there's a consent button that says no, right? In this is one instance. But it seems that so that the cultural spaces where we get to use these types of technologies are still emerging, right? And there's some choice there, but the logic of the models and the logic behind the models, i.e. OpenAI has a 10% stake in AMD now, a chip manufacturer, et cetera, exist in such a way that I think it's going to be really hard to make fundamental choices in terms of agency, right? Or maybe autonomy is a better word for it. Whereas your agency to think about what I heard from Carolyn's talk about, here's the different models we can highlight information or organize our information or think that it's valuable that we come to relate to our information. That probably has a little bit more room. And I think that the tension between between the AI industrial complex of these things are built, the data sensors exist, the chips have been made, and the content slop that we play in is where that tension's going to be.
In that they are all starting to be part of a whole, that there is a ecosystem that is self-contained there. Is that what you're referring to? That
in the same way, so I guess in the similar way that like the structure of academia is set up for gatekeeping, right? Like totally fair point, right? There's reasons for that, but the externalities are, as we saw in the chat, the global south and those people not trained at Cambridge don't speak a certain way or don't design a methodology in a certain way, and therefore their knowledge is not included. That creates a certain structure that perpetuates itself, and if you will, a knowledge infrastructure. And AI's knowledge infrastructure at the moment seems to be, giant data centers
Yeah.
that have very specific economic needs attached to them. That may change. I mean, it's very hardware constrained right now, which is again this really interesting moment, right? So that can change, but at the moment, the economics of it suggests there's a very specific way that these technologies will be socialized. And this is like an open AI masterclass. It's not, except I'm not a master. And that like open AI was the hope against economic, like profit-driven companies delivering AI, right? That's how they started. That was their whole thing. That obviously, yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
how it started, how it's going. So I think that's just like the case in point of saying, those structures, those economic structures are there.
Opening it up to Danny and Allan. I mean, kind of what you seem to be indicating is that the agency, you've talked about being on a precipice of not really understanding yet how we're going to engage with AI. As you said right at the beginning, like we do understand how we engage with social media. We are in an environment now where there are still tools that are kind of being spread out. We've got discussions and thinking going on in the academic space, and especially the humanities and social sciences space about how to approach this. We've got the libraries talking about critical integrity and really sort of questioning this material. But is the window for us to be able to leap into this and actually maintain our autonomy and have some control, is that closing? Are we in a particular period? I don't know. You seem to be nodding, Allan.
Yeah. I think the stage we're at the moment is that obviously the media narratives are largely around how much bigger and more capable these large language models are getting. And I think that's taking away from the sort of opportunity that is there for smaller, more efficiently trained models to be brought about. I mean, even in the large language model space, the DeepSeek models being produced by China have had far lower resource utilization to be effective. And so what I see to what Luke was saying is that there's sort of this perpetual aggregation of kind of power and wealth in those industries, pushing for these huge data centers and increasingly being extractive with the resources towards that. But to what end? What do we get from these large language models that we couldn't from smaller language models that are trained more efficiently and are more environmentally friendly and more place and context relevant?
All right, I've got some expressionist dance going on in front of me, which is saying it's time to move us on to looking at the Menti models, Menti results. So we're going to bring those up on the screen and have a little chat about them. So you remember that the first question was asking, so if that's the last one, I think, so if we want to just jump to the first one, was asking about where would our audience put themselves on the sliding scale of how much creating knowledge and using it. And the nice thing about the Menti results is you can see the median, but also kind of the actual bulk of where those results come. So in both cases, it's more heavily weighted down the lower end of the scale, but I've got to put my glasses on, sorry. I can't see that far without my specs. Okay, so there's more use, not a huge amount though, than creation. Do you find this surprising, anyone?
I do find it surprising. I find the consumption piece surprising. I mean, it depends on if we're talking about knowledge, information more broadly and consumption, I think there's a heck of a lot we're consuming that we maybe don't understand is AI generated or AI innate, whatever, complemented, So I think that's just an interesting observation for me. Do we always know when we're consuming? Are we intentional in our consumption? I guess it comes back to that passive, information behavior I was talking about before, passive consumption, where we may not actually even be interrogating what we're seeing, what we're consuming.
Well, that's right. I mean, every time you ask for directions in the car, and it gives you the short one because it knows that there's a blockage in the traffic somewhere. Is a good example. I don't know, do either of you have is that surprising to you that we've kind of got, they're both low, they're both less than 50%.
Yeah, I think it really would depend on the segment of people you ask and how they sort of understand knowledge as a concept, and as something that they engage with. But probably not surprising that consumption is higher, because that's sort of, I think, like dignifying the what tends to be considered the creation of new knowledge versus consumption. But yeah, I think that's about where my intuition
Okay,
sits, actually.
and Luke,
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on how we're defining knowledge for sure. Sorry
Right.
for the academic, but so yeah, but I think it does make sense that the consumption was a little bit higher. You know, the AI tools are not evenly distributed, so of course your consumption is going to be a little bit higher. If anything, right off that statement, it's interesting that people feel they create knowledge as much as they consume, you know, more or less as much as they consume it, looking at not the average, but just the graph there. Because, you know, do you create knowledge when I ask Chat GPT something, or is that just my consumption, right? And if
in
I've
some ways you
created
do
knowledge
kind of
and
feed it
then
back
pass
in,
it
but
on
yeah,
to someone, and
yeah.
I think that's a really interesting question, because yeah, am I a consumer of Chat GPT knowledge, or am I a producer of knowledge that I'm telling, you know, my household about, I don't know, how to fix this medical problem or whatever, you know,
Yeah.
whatever it is. Yeah.
Right, well, let's look at the second result. So the question was, in your experience with engaging with AI, that's not very good English, I apologise, for the purposes of finding something out, how would you estimate the quality of your results? So we have a very small proportion that say mostly rubbish, which is you know, probably good. No one said always accurate, but that's interesting. So the highest is more accurate than not. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think it really depends on sort of the like precision and reliability for the context that you're using it, right? It's like if you can tolerate risk or you know, sort of rough shapes in the task that you're doing or what your intention is, then what it's giving you might be more accurate without you necessarily understanding the like precision skew, say. Whereas, you know, if you're using it in an academic context, then you're going to deal with issues like hallucination, making up references, all that sort of stuff. But you may still get utility in what the output is, which you can then bridge some of those sort of accuracy or reliability gaps in applying what's come out.
I'd be really interested to learn more about what is more inaccurate than accurate, like in what those circumstances are. So people in the
Part of that could
audience.
be the poor phrasing of the questions.
No, yeah. But please, like put it into the documents, maybe, you know, that just the why is it more inaccurate? Do you reckon than not? Because I can think of some use cases that say where that's true for me for sure. But most, and you know, this is self-selection, right? Most of the things I would use it for would be in that orange band, the more accurate than inaccurate, or I would no longer use it. So yeah.
All right, the next one's going to have lots of words in it, because we've asked people to describe an opportunity they see with AI. So yeah, we might want to share that one on screen. I don't know if there's any there that you might want to speak to, one that you find resonates.
I mean, so just off the bat, our keynote made the point that science is political. And so, you know, we have that concern that that is biased as a result of AI will be biased. All data are biased. They're biased to the modes in which they were collected and by whom they were collected. So I understand that, but I think, you know, in the same way that AI has brought light to the problems with copyright, AI brings light to the problems of bias. I don't think we can say that these technologies are inherently then worse for these societal problems. I think they expose them and accelerate them, in the same way that tanks accelerated war, right? Like these are things that show what is happening. and how we use them is then up to us.
Danny, do you have any of those?
Yeah, it's just that made me think of something that I have been reflecting on it this year, which is that sort of idea that, you know, any technology really amplifies the human condition, doesn't it? You know, and I think Allan spoke about that earlier as well in terms of benchmark and what our benchmark is for AI compared to society. And I think that's, you know, that's absolutely, you know, a challenge. We are biased as a society, right? It's inherent in the history, in our history. So AI absolutely amplifies that, you know, or has the potential to amplify that in different use cases.
Any there that resonate for you, Allan?
Plenty. I think the one that really resonates for me is sort of the use of AI participating in a environmental decay effect. I couldn't get the exact wording of that, but yeah,
There was one there.
yeah. And I think that's absolutely a problem, right? And I think that deserves like continual criticism, but also requires kind of thoughtfulness in how you can participate within your context towards sort of a sense of prosperity, but also exercise more of your agency and not being a passenger to these things. So like, what's the sacrifice that you might make with that being the case? How do you challenge or participate in resistance against these kind of things, you know, for yourself within the group or organizational context you're in? What can you direct your energy towards? And I think a lot of these sorts of things are like coordination issues, right? It's like if we feel fragmented and individual amongst these huge moving forces, then we don't tend to do anything. Or we have to reach a certain point in which we try to take a more collective action-based approach, right? And I think at the moment we're seeing sort of like a huge suppression of those collective action type things, largely I think driven by the attention capture and sort of perpetual fear narratives that get channeled through our digital world. So yeah, participate locally, connect with people.
And that refusal, I mean, I think just reading one of the comments there, confronted the high cost environmental, human, creative tools for everyday tasks. I mean, part of that for me is like refusal of the tasks as well, as opposed to, you know, in addition to using this, you know, very large tool that makes doing this task worse, but it's an opportunity to realign there as well, right? Why am I writing this email as opposed to like AI will write this email for me?
How much of our work has been slop?
That's right, exactly. Yeah.
And while we bring up the last response for the last question, just interesting what you're describing there, Allan, kind of speaks back to what Danny was talking about earlier about bringing the human back in, that the stories are very technological driven. And so when you talk from the technology point of view, you're not talking about the environment, probably deliberately. Okay, so this word cloud is where we ask people to write up to 3 separate words to describe their thoughts on the issue of trust in AI. And the big ones seem to be more on the distrust side of things. We've got cautious is the largest one, bias is probably about the same, and impossible, mistrust. I'm sure in the smaller words, which I can't read from here to save myself, there would be, I feel like I'm at the optometrist, would be, there's going to be a range. So we'll certainly explore that in our write-up, but that's going to be an interesting observation.
It is an interesting thing, isn't it? I wonder also, I mean, I don't disagree either. I wonder, you know, if we broaden the question or the conversation out to trust in institutions, trust in AI, trust in technology, trust in big tech, trust in publishers, you know, what sorts of words would bubble up in those kind of contexts? I wonder if we get some similar words or whether there'd be something a bit more unique in different trust contexts, I guess.
And I don't think we should read this as negative, right? Like a cautious, skeptical, critical thinking framework to a hammer is pretty useful, right? And so to AI, so to any of the institutions you just spoke to, Danny. So I mean, I think that's
Yeah, I think in the context of this discussion, we're putting AI as the other, and amongst these like various other structures and institutions, we've got this sort of inherent trust because it's being the glue to some degree of our function, right? But I actually think that the like positioning AI as the kind of entity to be distrustful and critical about will bring more of the focus towards how much do we trust our institutions, what should we exercise as resistance against those institutions, because we've held AI to a certain benchmark, and it's used nefariously in a sort of continuing fashion. So that's the question I asked, is like, if we've got this artificial entity that has some version of intelligence, like who's accountable for that? Like where does the buck stop? Like if AI does something in your organizational context or in your day-to-day life, can you just say, well, it was AI's fault? And it's like, who can say that?
It does leverage those issues of trust in a really interesting way. 10 years ago, there was this meme that was going around Facebook where like people write, I do not allow Facebook to use my image and content to make money or to make money. And it was like people thought, like it was like, edging towards this like kind of sovereign citizen. They don't have power over me because I've told them no.
Yeah.
Right. When it was a joke. It was like too bad for you, right? You're on the platform. There's a really well-regarded academic technology group that sent out this email that said your universities are using your content for their AI machines like Microsoft Copilot, et cetera, and you haven't consented for this. Please fill out this form and send it to your boss. And like these are really renowned people. And I had this laugh because I'm like, it's the exact same moment that we're seeing in academic circles around, well, I don't want you making money off what I do or don't use Copilot for type thing. But it's falling on the same ears, apparently.
Yeah.
Right. And the point is this transfer of trust, right, has gone from, of course, you don't trust Facebook because they're Facebook, to I don't trust my employer because the structure of how AI is being deployed is actually through, right? One of these companies. So it's just, really interesting.
It's like guns versus people with guns.
Yeah, exactly.
Any thoughts on that, Danny?
No.
I just work here.
I'm just becoming a member of the audience and listening to some really interesting dialogue there. Yeah.
Well, I mean, after 20 plus years of trying to talk to academics about signing their copyright away to publishers, it's like the same again. It's like, did you not read your contract before you signed it? The same problem. We've got a few questions in the Q&A, and don't be distressed, audience, if your question doesn't get addressed now, because we are having our final session 2:45 to 3:45, where all three of our panelists here will be returning, and we have some of the other panelists as well, and we will address any unanswered questions at that point. But one of the questions that's come up here is can you, and I don't know who it's aimed at, expand on cognitive glue? Might have been you, Luke.
That's
Allan, right?
Yeah, that was me. I suppose cognitive glue can be looked at as sort of individually useful or useful between different people, but essentially the way I see it is you've got a certain set of like understanding, mental models, way that you see the world, right? And engaging with an AI, you have the opportunity to sort of fill in some of the blanks that may exist in your existing world model and understanding of things through a dialogical engagement. And that's a really powerful thing, right? I think no matter what the sort of spread of kind of accuracy, reliability is, most people have had that sort of aha moment with AI, where they've understood something that was difficult to understand before. And I think that sort of opportunity for cognitive glue between people is really powerful. Across languages, across cultures, I think AI can really support that sort of cohesion and coherence and sense making. Obviously, we have to factor in the sort of reliability and accuracy issues, but then you look at sort of what the trade-off is between novelty and utility in those circumstances, and is it adding benefit? Can the stakeholders evaluate that and realize it?
So is that, speaking of optometrists, is that like if you've got sort of the half cut off letters, our brain knows enough about the letters to be able to work out what the letters are? Is that a similar thing, or is that's inherent knowledge that I'm just bringing in? You're talking about external knowledge coming in.
Yeah, it's
Right.
filling in the blanks in how you might see the world or a context outside of the ones that you used to.
Yeah, right, cool. Okay, I think we can probably I'll ask this question. Let's see what happens. Should we be paying for AI add-ons for our databases? Because they're coming to us as a generous gift from our suppliers, our vendors, often without the option of us turning them off. So I guess the paying thing might be, should they be an optional extra rather than embedded? I don't know if people have got opinion. I have personal opinions on this, but
I'd like to hear your opinions on this, Danny.
I do think that we should have the option, you know, and the fact that we need to have them on to even do our assessments of them means that they're on, which is, yeah. So in most of the cases, we've had no reason to be concerned about them as so far.
Yeah, look, I think it depends in my mind. It depends what we're talking about. What sort of AI functionality are we paying more for, and what is a part of the natural progression of the improvement of a product? So for me, it kind of depends. I don't think all AI functionality is equal.
And I mean, on that, it's a qualifying that, right? It's if I paid for one, I'd want to have agency over it, right? Or with it, I guess, right? However you want to define that. So if you have 12 data, I'm don't work in the library, but if I had 12 databases that all fed into my library, and each of them had AI summary bots or grabbers of, use linked research or whatever it was, to me, I would not want that. I would want to pay for the one federated one that can sit atop it and I can design, right? So if someone wants to come in and I say, hey, I actually want to ensure that voices from the global south on this topic, come up at X amount of rate, as opposed to, and like be able to design that for, as Allan points out, our context, right? A lot of our students in Deakin are from Greater Asia. Why don't we have citations from Greater Asia? Why do we go back to the UK and the US, right? Okay, let's design that into how the library tool works, and then great, I'll pay for that. And I would consider that kind of transaction. But if it's slid into your normal database tool, then I mean, the next truism, right? If you're not paying for the product, then you are the product. And I mean, I think that that would be my concern.
That's a really good point. It's one we're going to pick up in the next panel, which is about what information does come in when you are trying to discover. So some interesting things that have come up today, and we'll pick some of these conversations up. There's other questions, but we'll pick those up at 2:45. But things around media narratives around AI, and a comment about the game we've been playing in academia, and what game do we want to be playing, that we have choices in what we value, that there is an exceptional level of engagement with the backlashes that are occurring, that people have personal responsibility in their interactions with these sorts of systems. So lots of little gems there that we'll be pulling through into the conversation we're going to have towards the end of the day, which will be much more free-flowing. So for now, I'd like to thank our amazing panelists, Luke, Allan and Danny online. We'll see you all later in the day. And also thanks to AJ and Caroline for their video contributions. We're going to break now for 45 minutes for lunch. So come back here at 1 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time for our second panel, which will look at discovery. And thank you for all your interactions and contributions, everybody.